And then after that, you put the egg in.
Right.
That one.
Now, if we're really detailed in our observations and we're really careful in how we poured it down the side, this being more dense, we want to check to see. The reason why we did the first part was to watch how the egg floated.
Yeah.
The egg sank to the bottom in the fresh water, and it sank to the bottom in the fresh water. But how the egg sat on the bottom was different, and Adam Pennington brought up in class that there's a little air pocket in the egg that had an impact on the float, so that it pulled up more. So it was sitting more on its end in the salt water than here.
Yeah, because this one's more
dense. So this being more dense, that means that the weight of the water that it's displacing is more. So the buoyant force is more. Okay, that's Archimedes' principle.
Yeah.
And then what we did was we poured this into here, but we did it down the side so that we didn't mix the fresh water with the salt water. And we put the egg in, and we wanted to see where the salt water went, whether it was on the top or the bottom, just to confirm that it was more dense. And what we started to do from that very first point in that lesson, when the students did that part, they noticed that the egg would sit as though it was in salt water. Okay? So that's the density thing.
Okay.
And then the next part that we did was we looked at these materials. So keep that thing running for a second.
Okay.
We worked with molasses. So I'll be back.
Okay.
And we worked with a whole bunch of solid objects after. So it went off for a second.
I think it's still recording.
Is it?
Yeah.
So if you look at molasses, it's quite a viscous substance.
Yeah.
And I didn't want the students to do this just because of how messy it can get. And then the next step, we wanted to look at what happens when we add oil to this material. And what students started to see was, if I can see that, can you get the screen on so I can see that that shows up in the video? So that when that shows up in there, you can see that there's actually separation between at the bottom. Well, the two fluids have different densities and they don't mix. So because the two fluids have different densities, this moves to the top and that moves to the bottom. Okay?
So it's kind of like adhesive because like the molecules.
Well, no, it's actually not.
Cohesion.
No, it's I mean, they're adhering to each other. So the molasses, the water molecules in the molasses are adhering to themselves, and the oil adheres to themselves, so they don't like each other and they separate.
Yeah.
The next thing we did was we put fresh water into oil and molasses. So I'm going to get some fresh water. I'll be back in a second. How hard is this going to be to airdrop or post a haiku?
This video?
Yeah.
Like this one we're doing right now.
Yeah.
Like if you want to post it on.
Yeah.
I think I can.
Okay. So we poured in some water. Actually, I should have done it more carefully than that. And what you'll start to know and see is now you got 3 layers, different densities. You got the oil, the water, and the molasses. So the last thing we wanted to check was what happens when we put certain solids into this substance. When we put the egg in, it actually, because the egg and its weight, it went through the oil, and we know from last one that it would go into the water, but it didn't sink through the molasses. Because the density of the molasses, the buoyant force of the molasses pushing up, pushed back up on the egg too. Okay?
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it didn't get to the bottom. We took things like, and I'll pull up a bunch of other things. Rubber stoppers, glass balls, metal. If you take a look at this rubber stopper, and we put it in, if you see where it goes,
Yeah, right to the molasses.
Right through the molasses. No, it's
No,
actually
it's on the molasses.
right. And the glass ball, in terms of density, would be an interesting one to look at.
Yeah.
Went right to the bottom.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you can take a look at a piece of wood.
It floats.
It floats, and it floats on the oil. So the wood's less dense than the oil. Okay. So what we did was we took all these different solids and compared, and that's why in the lab there's the different. That's why there's the different comparisons. You can say egg into water, oil, and molasses, and what happened. Which layer did it fall into?
Yeah.
And what I'm trying to remember, I don't think there are any other substances that fit into that. Let's take another one. We got a penny, see where it goes. If it went down to the bottom, there, it sunk through the molasses. So the penny sunk right down to the bottom. So it's more dense than the molasses. The density of oil and water are so close that you won't have any major change between the different substances. Okay?
Yeah.
So if you look over here, Conrad, this is your table. Okay? And in that table, you'd fill it in with those comparison parts, whether they sunk or float in your observations, and then you answer those questions.
So should I just leave the egg one blank and then?
No, because we know what happens. I told you what happened to
okay.
the egg one. Okay? If you could press pause and save. Do you have a YouTube account?